What's up, guys? This is Kieran from the Trinity of Lift, and today I bring all of you a Bujin deck profile. It's a pretty fun deck right now, and it still does fairly well just because of how much destruction effects there are in the meta right now, and how Bujins are just known for just avoiding all of that kinds of destruction. It still does fairly well against the meta, surprisingly, and it can hold its own fairly well. It might not win anything important, but it still does good, like against Burning Abyss and Shadows and whatnot. So I'm going to give you guys the list I've basically been running for a couple weeks now and what I've been accustomed to. So let's get right into it. First up, since this is a Bujin deck, we do play 3 Bujin Yamato. He is the best card in the deck by far, probably, because he does everything that the Bujin deck does to run, basically. It fuels your grave, it fuels your hand, and what more can I say? It just does spectacular. Next up, we do play 3 Bujin Mikazuchi. I primarily run 3 just because I like to continue my board presence. And because how there will be times when you kind of run out of your defensive resources. So having the Mikazuchi to continue your board presence, even if one of your Bujins get destroyed, is very good. As well as it kind of can help you progress into your rank 4 plays if you ever have to. So yeah, 3 Mikazuchi. Next up, we run the 1 Hirame. I only run 1. I know a lot of people like to run 2, but I only like 1 primarily because all I see Hirame as is kind of just to make a rank 4 when I have to. So I don't really see the need more often than not, as I can do what I would do with any extra deck monster, basically what I can do with any of my Bujins. So I only like to have 1 if I ever have to go for like big damage or whatnot. And outside of that, I don't want to see it that much. So having the 1 when I do need it is just fine with me. Next up, we run the 1 Arasuda. Because of how we'll probably be using a lot of our graveyard effects quite often, I like to have Arasuda with the same mentality like I like to have Mikazuchi, just to keep our board presence and whatnot, and to also kind of help us, again, progress with our rank 4s if we ever have to. So 1 is fine with me. Next up, we run the 3 Bujingi Crane. Again, a searchable Honest. Why wouldn't you want to run a searchable Honest that you can run 3 of, guys? It's pretty stellar. Next up, we run the 2 Bujingi Turtle. And then the 2 Bujingi Hare. These are our graveyard effects, and we have to run them at basically at 2, I feel. You could kind of run Hare at 3, but I still, just because of all the destruction, like I've been saying many times throughout this video. But I kind of like 2 because these guys do slow down your hands, as they only have their basic effects engraved. So outside of that, they're just basically going to be a normal summon. So having the 2/2, just so I don't see it as often as I feel like I might in the hand, is good, because frankly I'd rather send them to the grave through Yamato or Susanoo's effect rather than draw into it. So yeah, having this ratio has been working just fine with me. Next, and finally, for our last graveyard monster, we do run the 1 Quillin for that simple destruction. Just because of how everything floats, though, I don't see myself running more than 1 Quillin, as it's very selective with what I might want to pop, and I don't want to always give my opponent the free plus, because again, this deck is pretty slow. So just having the 1 Quillin is fine if we ever have to run into a problem card or whatnot. Then, finally, for the last 2 non-Bujin monsters, we do play 2 Honest, because it's in format. Everything is light in the deck. Why wouldn't you run 2 Honest, basically? So that's it for the monsters. Next up for the spells, we do have 3 Fire Formation Tenki. This is primarily to keep our consistency of the deck up and always to ensure that we do get our Yamatos as soon as possible. Next up, we run 3 Pot of Duality with the same reason as Tenki. We want to see our Yamatos as soon as possible, so getting that 3 extra digs into your deck to get basically whatever you might possibly need is a very strong effect in this deck, especially since it's how slow it is. Next up, we run 3 Mystical Space Typhoon. Again, you have to run 3 MST. It's kind of staple now in the deck just because of how Cleaf Arts are a thing and all that kind of stuff, and how all the back row is still there. So we have the MST so we can avoid those unnecessary uses of our graveyard traps, because after all, they are a very crucial resource for the deck, and we don't want to burn through them unnecessarily. So we have the 3 MST just for that. Next up, we run 2 Bujin Carnation. This is our comeback from behind card, and Just because of how slow Bujins are, and if someone does get an out to your Bujin, having the Carnation as a way to come back into the game from seemingly nothing is very powerful, and I actually have won a couple games with Bujin Carnation. So yeah, you don't want to run 3 because it will clog, so 2 is just fine. Next up, we run 2 Kaiser Coliseum. Because of how slow Bujin is and how you'll end up usually just summoning 1 Bujin and protecting that with your life, having the Kaiser to basically force your opponent to play at the same level as you really helps slow them down and help you basically overwhelm them with the 1 monster that you might have on board. Frankly, having the Kaiser for things like Burning Abyss at all, they cannot swarm the field basically at all. So having this along with the Yamato is very strong just because of how Yamato can constantly keep protecting itself. And how Kaiser can keep protecting basically your opponent's field and how they cannot really summon anything at all. And then finally, for the last one-ofs, we play the 1 Book and the 1 Raigeki. Again, power spells. I feel like you should run them in almost every deck, so I run them in this deck, obviously. So that's it for the spells. Next up, for the traps, we run 2 Dimensional Prison. Primarily, again, we want to protect our slow monsters. We want to protect our slow deck. So having the 2 D-Prison for battle traps is very good. Also, it kind of also prevents your opponent from floating, especially in the Shadow matchup when their fusions cannot float at all. So having this to protect your people is very good because, again, like I said, they don't get to float. And then finally for the traps, we just play a lot of one-ofs. We play in the form of 1 Bottomless, 1 Warning, 1 Torrential, 1 Breakthrough, and 1 Compulse. I run the Torrential because we can protect our guys through the Torrential, and having just that kind of panicky needed board clear is helpful to help push for damage because sometimes Bujins might have an issue with that. So that's it for the main deck. Next up for the extra deck, we do play 2 Bujinte Susanoo. He's probably your go-to guy in the extra deck. You only need 2 because you'll never need to make the 3rd, believe me. And having essentially a more efficient Yamato is very good because then you always will have access to whatever you might need rather than having to force Yamato to either add 1 to your hand, send 1 to grave, and then possibly not have something good. So having the Susanoo as a more efficient Yamato is still very good and it helps get through your deck. Next up, we do play the 1 Kagutsuchi. He is your wall of the deck, basically. Whenever you might have to wall up without graveyard presence, like without hares or turtles or whatnot, you can summon Kagutsuchi to actually help hold out for a few turns because he can prevent his own destruction by detaching a material. As well as he is still pretty big at 2.5k innately, but also at times getting up to 2.6, 2.7, or even 2.8 at times. Next up, we play the 1 Bujinte Tsukuyomi. This is to help us get out of our dead hand as quick as possible, as well as help get into our deck a little bit more. Then we play the 1 Tiger King. Everything is basically Beast Warrior in this deck, so we can run Tiger King as a pseudo skill drain, as well as it can help us. It helps use our tankies because at times I've seen tankies can actually kind of clog up your back row. So having kind of like the Tiger King to sort of alleviate that issue is pretty good. Next up, we run the 1 Omega because everything in this deck is light. Why wouldn't you run Omega? Then for the next rank 4s, we just play kind of staples. We play the 1 Castell, the 1 Honor Arc, and the 1 Dweller. Then we play the 1 Black Ship, the 1 Rhapsody, so we can take away our opponent's monsters in their grave. And then the 1 Cowboy because we like to poke for game. And then finally for the last 3, we do play 1 Heartland Draco, 1 Utopia, and 1 E-Knight. Heartland Draco is here primarily because we have the tankies, so having that board presence and that pressure on your opponent is very good. We have Utopia for whenever for some odd reason our Kagutsuchi already got destroyed or whatever. Like if something happens to Kagutsuchi, you'll usually go into Utopia after if you ever have to. Outside of that, though, you probably won't ever really make it, but it's there just in case. And then finally, we have the 1 E-Knight. When we want to really slow down our opponent, when they have too much advantage over us, we can make E-Knight to clear the board. So, that's it for my Bujin deck profile, guys. Feel free to let me know what you guys think of this list down in the comment section below. And as always, this is Kirim from the Trinity of Lift, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.